You can refer to me as Angus or Annie. It's good. I think that's something that makes me different from other trans people as well, is I do not have an issue of dead naming at all.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. Come with us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I identify as a cisgender woman and my pronouns are she and her. In this episode, I'm speaking to Angus Brown, or Annie to her close friends, a musician and performance poet whose writing is heavily influenced by themes of gender, sexuality, and mental health. Angus's pronouns are she and her, and she identifies as a transgender woman and butch lesbian. Find out what that means to Angus in this episode. We also talk about the balance of masculinity and femininity, the evolution of the word lesbian, that labels can resonate whatever their original meaning, how gender identity influences self-expression, navigating being a teenager again, sexuality and attraction, and that moving from one side of the line of androgyny to the other side is only a small step. It was recorded on the 4th of January 2021. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
My name is Angus Brown. My friends call me Annie.
Hello, Angus, Annie. and how do you identify?
I identify with she, her pronouns. I identify as a butch lesbian and a transgender woman.
Wow, okay then. And what does that mean to you?
Oof, good question. For me, I find a lot of comfort in labels. I appreciate there's like quite a recent kind of resistance of them, of having kind of words that are kind of short and easy ways of describing you as a person. But for me, I take a lot of comfort in it. I have quite a giddy and happy memory of being in a nightclub before I'd kind of come out as transgender and just thinking I'm a dyke to watch out for. And for me, that was just such a thank you. That was such a comfort blanket for me. Something about that felt exactly right and exactly me. And so that makes sense for me to say, to describe myself as a dyke, or to describe myself as a lesbian, or to describe myself as a trans woman. That feels like something that I can say, yep, that's me. And that's what it means to me, I think, if that serves as an answer.
Yeah. I love that because, yeah, kind of like you spoke about that in the video that Taryn Everdeen made for you or with you, which was lovely, which I will link to in on the page. And you said something about not an oxymoron as such, but like the contradiction in the term, like a transgender lesbian indicates that there was a whole lot to do about masculinity and femininity. So what does masculinity and femininity mean to you, and how does that fit in with your identity?
I have a lot of both, I think. I think that's something that's really important. I think one of the most kind of touching moments for me is after I was quite clearly genderqueer, as in after I came out as genderqueer and started wearing makeup in public and wearing dresses in public. I had to sit down with a friend, and I was kind of trying to explain it to somebody I didn't know in as kind of simple terms as I could. And the friend just went, "Look, you've got a lot of masculinity and you've got a lot of femininity. I really like that, and I don't want to lose sight of either my masculinity or my femininity. That's something that's both are really, really important to me." So I think the term lesbian incorporates both sides of it weirdly, because you can't be a lesbian unless you're a woman. But at the same time, it's okay, this woman is more mannish and this woman is more, I think that's what the word literally means. It means frigid or mannish or I think originally boring.
Right.
Which is,
Wow.
I find that really funny.
You mean like
I
the
think they
roots
do
of the word, like the
the
etymology of the
roots of the
word?
word. Yeah,
Oh,
and
wow.
that's it's something that people cleverer and much better research than me would be able to talk about at much greater length. But it was the association of lesbians as a lesbian was a boring person and also somebody who wasn't interested in men. And so it kind of got properly appropriated by the right group. And now it's this kind of term that means more to us or to me.
Ah, wow. So it's also a reclaimed term, kind of like queer or whatever. Yeah, I
Definitely
suppose.
100%. It's one of the first
Yeah.
ones.
Wow, I had no
Yeah.
idea. I learn so much
Yeah.
all the time. That's amazing.
Well, me too, and I feel like a bit of an imposter because I should have done more research, but queer history is a bit of a mystery to me. my girlfriend's a complete and utter expert in it, so I'm a bit daunted by it from that perspective. And also, there aren't a lot of happy endings, so I kind of lean away from it a bit. But occasionally, you get something like that where a word's just done a full 180 and it means something completely different, and that's so exciting. Or it is to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one because I feel like I identify with the word queer. I use cis queer at the moment,
Mm.
just to say. I don't know, really. I talk a bit about it in the previous episode of the podcast, not episode 25. Anyway, yeah, but queer to me means, I mean, it's a positive thing. To me, it just means unconventional,
Mm.
rebellious. That's kind of what I associate it with. And it's interesting just how anyone and everyone can just resonate with the word. And if you look back rationally to the history of it and all that kind of stuff, it might have a completely different vibe. But you can just say like, no, that word just works for me, and that just feels right. It's like that.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I knew that I was queer before I knew how I was queer. So I identified as bisexual for a long time before
Ah.
kind of coming to terms with any of the other parts of it. But I think, like you say, it feels like something rebellious. And maybe it's edgy because it's been a slur.
Hmm.
But it feels edgy in a good and a brave way. And I think, like I say, that was something that was exciting about it for me as a
Mm.
term before I knew how it was. It's like, no, that feels appropriate before I know how it is appropriate. I think I
Yeah.
can imagine you've interviewed non-binary peoples who hear non-binary as a term for the first time and go, that resonates, and I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure why yet. And I think you hear that word before you know that it applies to you, but there's that resonance and there's that kind of immediate connection going, okay, something about that sits with me.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. So, do you feel like you've always known on some level about your gender nonconformity, I suppose?
I this is quite a difficult one, and I can only speak from my experience, but I get slightly bothered when people talk about me as always having been a woman.
Right.
I think I identified very happily as a man for a while, and that felt right to me at the time.
Mm.
It, be- but then I'm not going to deny that there are things that I look back upon now and go, "Oh, that was clearly a signal of something." I mean, I remember being 13 at Legoland, and kind of the ticket inspector said to me and my sister, "Oh, hello, girls," and I wondered why that made me feel so happy for so long, and
Ah.
I couldn't quite put my finger on what was quite right about that at the time. And I don't think that's because I was a 13-year-old girl. I was a 13-year-old boy, but it sat with me. And I think that kind of explains things, but it doesn't. I think I'm wandering slightly away from your question.
That's
What I
okay.
mean is, there are things in my life that have kind of said that I was effeminate before there were things that said that I was a woman and that I wanted to be a woman. And those are separate things. But
Mm.
yes, I do love my tangents.
Tangents are fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
that's really fascinating actually. I feel like I learn so much from having these conversations, and everyone's so different in ways that I hadn't even imagined they could be different. So, yeah.
Mm,
Wow. So,
yeah,
about your name, so you use Angus and you use Annie. So,
I do.
how does that work with you? I know you're an artist, like you're a musician and you write poetry and things, don't you? So,
I do.
is it just a matter of using your different names for different purposes, or how does your gender journey fit into like your art and your writing?
It's a very good question. In terms of my name, I only came up with Annie so that it would be easier for certain friends to remember my pronouns, because if they'd known me for a few years, then they'd know me as my male friend Angus, and they'd have to kind of correct themselves. And I think if they go my friend Annie, then they could quite easily move into she, her pronouns. So that's why I came up with Annie. I wasn't really expecting it to stick. My original idea was Carol. Everybody that I've spoken to about that has kind of instantly recoiled.
Really?
Whereas I've had people say Annie suits you so much better than Angus. And people who find it rolls off the tongue when looking at me easier. Even people who've known me
Mm.
for years and years and years look at me and go, "Oh yeah, Annie," which is really bizarre because I don't even remember choosing it that clearly.
Oh wow.
It just feels very bizarre. But in terms of performance, whenever I picture an Angus, I picture a kind of well built rugby lad with like the muscles and like, and like the real kind of presence, and maybe like more and richer hair than me. And I really like the idea that Angus could be this limp-wristed poet. So I'm kind of, just for the sake of being obnoxious, keeping Angus on because I know it stirs the pot a bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like performing as Angus.
Mhm.
I feel like I really, really like hearing Angus and she together because it happens less and because it feels unusual, and I don't feel like I've renounced one to take up the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Annie is a nickname that is just particularly popular among my friends and people who are dear to me.
Yeah.
My parents, I don't think, will ever call me Annie. That doesn't feel right to them at all. But in terms of being a performer, it's something that's kind of original to me and true to me. And the stage names that I've tried to come up with all felt a bit ridiculous. But Angus Brown as a stage name just feels right, and it feels appropriate to me. So I don't know if that fully answers the question, but Angus Brown feels like the right kind of stage name for me.
Yeah, yeah. No, that does make a lot of sense. And like you say about the pronouns, if people can associate a name with pronouns, that does help. Because if you use
Mm.
gender neutral pronouns, for example, it's kind of a safe thing, isn't it? And you can kind of practice doing that with everyone. But I feel like I know where I trip up sometimes is if someone uses a more, say, quote unquote, feminine name and then uses male pronouns. That's when I trip
Yes.
up more. So yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
Mm.
So I had a look on Spotify at all your music, and it looks like you're very prolific, aren't you? There's a lot on there. So is it mostly from the last couple of years? Have you been writing for longer, or?
I put my first single up in 2018. Before that, I think I started writing when I was about 17, and very kind of edgy line breaks, a little bit dark and a little bit creepy poetry. I was quite a different person then. And then yeah, I don't think I was that great a poet to begin with. I don't think anybody would refute that or challenge that looking at the stuff I was writing when I was about 17. But more recently, in terms of the music, I just fell right into it. I really love doing it. I don't think it sounds particularly good. I think it's a part of kind of growing up with anti-folk, Daniel Johnston and Jeffrey Lewis and Kimya Dawson, who would record with their internal microphone on their laptop and leave it like that. I just had to produce something that I was happy with and
Mm.
something that felt right and true, as cheesy as that sounds. I just had to produce something that I was happy with, which is why there's quite a lot of my stuff on Spotify, because I've got quite low standards. um, but
Oh.
yeah, I'm beginning to really kind of enjoy the production side of things as well, and picking different instruments and making it sound different, and
Mm.
spending more time filing down the lyrics and the words. There's some quite different ends of the spectrum in terms of the music that I produce on Spotify at the moment. But yeah, I've made quite a lot, and I think it's kind of easier for me to do something that feels kind of honest and straight from the heart if I'm in a skin that I feel more comfortable with. I had a breakdown at the end of my first year, and my first single was kind of a response to that. It was, I need to do something with my life that feels right and that feels like it's my own thing that just belongs to me.
Mhm.
And that's kind of, I've been on a kick of that ever since. And I think, again, like the individual steps since there, like having my first partner and then having my second partner, being able to identify as genderqueer and then being able to identify as a different kind of genderqueer, like it's been the steps that, and because I've been able to talk about it in this kind of public space, I've been able to process things a lot easier.
Mm.
So it almost feels separate from my gender identification, but at the same time, I think it's quite intrinsically linked, because of course, if I'm in a more kind of expressive and comfortable mindset, I'm going to be able to talk about something as personal as my gender or my mental health or my partners.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds. It sounds like I don't know, like one influences the other and back again. It's like this cycle, really, isn't it? I suppose
Mm,
not necessarily a parallel, maybe, but like a flow, like an ebb and flow of things, maybe.
I
Yeah.
think so. I think
Mm.
something that's definitely kind of definitely not exclusive to trans people, and probably not exclusive to minority groups either, but is that somebody could tap me on the shoulder and say, "Oh, this is Angus. She's a trans poet," and then I think it's an interesting one because I think you kind of nobody assumes that everything about them is linked. I think we kind of think of a person, we think of all the different kind of parts of their life. And there's part of me that goes, yes, I am a trans poet. And there's part of me that goes, I'm trans and I am a poet. And also I work in this extremely low paid retail job as well. And everything kind of influences each other a bit, but they're also kind of different parts of my life. I'm a completely different person when I'm directing to when I'm producing music to when I'm serving customers fast food. It's
Yeah.
they are kind of all me, but they're all different kind of settings. And I think we don't really do that with cis or heterosexual people in the same way. But maybe we do. But I don't think you ever introduce somebody as here's a cis poet. Cis white male poet Seamus Heaney, for example. It doesn't quite roll
Yeah.
off the tongue quite the same way. He's still a brilliant poet, and I wish I could write like Seamus Heaney, but it doesn't feel quite the same. And I think we go, yeah, he was probably a great partner, a great friend as well. And I don't know,
Yeah.
we go Irish poet Seamus Heaney.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I'm very much spitballing, but
No,
yeah, I
that
think
makes
it's
a
an
lot of
interesting
sense,
question.
actually. Yeah, because we sometimes feel the urge to introduce people with maybe what makes them different, but then, like I realized recently, like emphasizing difference is not necessarily a good thing, and it's more about what we all have
Mm,
in common. So it would be great to just introduce people with their names without having to say what their gender is or whatever. But at the same time, it's kind of good to at right now, because we're not at that stage yet, are we? So in the meantime, it's I guess good to come up with pronouns and things like that, and making that just a normal thing to talk about and stuff. Yeah.
of course, and I don't think there's any shame in admitting that there's something exciting about hearing something from a minority group either. I think
Mm.
Gil Scott Heron, for example, his kind of first album is called A New Black Poet, and part
Mhm.
of what makes that so exciting is he's like, no, this is a distinctly black voice, and this is written as a distinctly black narrative, and it's really
Mhm.
important that that comes first.
Mhm.
And of course, it's completely different, but I think there are elements that are the same in terms of, that's not how I choose to kind of approach my own art, but I understand the need for that and the excitement around that. And as a consumer of media, going, it's important I make a distinct effort to listen to voices of underrepresented backgrounds, and sometimes that is gender, and sometimes that is race, and sometimes that is sexuality, and sometimes that is nation. Like, it's important we listen to people from areas of civil war and civil upset, and that can't be understated either. But yeah, no, of course it varies massively from person to person.
Mhm.
But yeah, I
Mhm.
think you're right. I think it would be nice, but we're not at that stage yet. So I think it's important to kind of say that as well.
Yeah. In your video, you said there were several great lines that I sort of wrote down, but one thing you said is you learn so much about yourself from the people you fancy, and
Yeah.
you mentioned sort of identifying as bi for a long time.
Yes.
So I mean, how is that? How has your journey in that evolved? Like your attraction in your attractions?
Oof, shit. That's quite a hard one. I think it doesn't always feel entirely true, but I think it feels very, very true to me. Is that I I'm definitely sexually attracted to men, but there are very, very few men who I've been romantically attracted to.
Hmm.
And I think saying I'm I mean there's so many terms involved there. I don't think it I think introducing in terms of just introducing myself, or in terms of a quick answer, saying I'm bisexual, but I'm monoromantic for women. That feels kind of less. It feels like it obfuscates more than just saying I'm a lesbian. Sometimes I'm interested in having sex with men.
Mm.
The other thing, and I really hate myself for jumping on the kind of men are trash bandwagon. That's not what I'm doing. But in purely sexual situations, I haven't felt very safe around men, and that's that's quite a hard thing for me to admit because
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, I have admitted it before. That's when I say it's a hard thing to admit. I don't want it to be that I don't want it to be me accusing all men, because I know I've facilitated a lot of those situations. I know that when somebody hits on me or catcalls or otherwise flirts with me when I'm outwardly female, my instant gut reaction is to flirt back, because that's what's going to make me feel safest. But then, like, instants later, I feel completely disgusted at myself for doing that, and I'm not quite sure why. And
Wow.
there's an
Yeah.
element of the cis women I know learning that whole whole mess when they're about 13 or 14, or maybe even younger, and I'm learning it all at once when I'm 22. And the difficulty there is I still feel like I'm appropriating that, but also it's something that's been said a lot, is that being trans is like being a teenager again. You have to learn how to dress again. You have to
Mm.
learn how to call yourself. You have to learn how to respond to things that you haven't heard before. And a lot of that's really exciting. A lot of that really isn't exciting. And being a teenager wasn't particularly fun the first time. But again, I'm kind of leading away from the question, which is,
That's okay.
like I said, I kind of knew that I was queer before I knew how I was queer. Bisexual made a lot of sense. I knew that my first kiss was with a man, and a man that I still think is very, very attractive. And it's complicated, because although I don't feel comfortable in the label bisexual anymore, it doesn't feel like it's kind of
Mm.
my story to tell, or my label to kind of appropriate. I
Mm.
spent a lot of time very, very comfortable there, and before I kind of had come to terms with my own gender, it instantly made me queer and gave me a voice in queer spaces, which is really important as well.
Mm.
Without I don't know. I feel like bisexuals get a pass for a lot of things, and there's all of the biphobia, and there's bi-erasure, but bisexuals get a pass for a lot of things, and for having
Mm.
preferences, and for things being a bit more complicated and a bit more transitional, which is in itself kind of a biphobic thing to say as well. One of my biggest embarrassments in life is that I've confirmed the stereotype of being a bisexual who's actually going towards one way entirely the entire time. Um, you speak to a bisexual and they'll roll their eyes, because they've had so many conversations where somebody's like, "Oh, but you're gay and you're just getting to being gay," or "Oh, you're straight and you just want to seem cool," and that's something that gets thrown at bisexual people all the time. I really, something I really find really embarrassing is that I've just massively confirmed that stereotype, um, without really ever planning to.
That's I think that's kind of funny though, because in the end though, all these terms, like yeah, there are sort of standard definitions for them, but then there's also what it means to you, and also like if it just resonates with you, if it feels right to you,
Mhm.
then it does, right? You know, and obviously there's always going to be people who don't agree with it and stuff, but that's too bad because it's your identity and you get to make the rules. So
Very true. Yeah.
yeah. So, how do you see your gender identity? Do you see it evolving further? Do you feel like you're quite happy where you are at the moment? Or do you see it as something that might change again?
I think there's always the possibility for it to change
Mm.
again. It. I think the way I've been trying to explain it to my mum is because my mum my mum once said, "Oh yeah, I used to get mistaken for a boy all the time." I said, "Oh, me too. In fact, at birth I got mistaken for a boy." She didn't find that very funny. Um, the I the way I've explained it to my mum is that I've always been very, very close to the line in terms of androgyny. I've always been an effeminate male up until the point where I was a masculine woman. And all that's changed is I've moved from being very, very close to the line one side to being very, very close to the line the other side. I think it would be
Mm.
like if you lived on the border between France and Germany, and you've been living in France for 21 years, and you decide you're going to live in Germany, and you're literally 2 meters away from where you used to live, but
Mm.
you're living in the same place, but you're just changing the name and you're changing the postcode.
Slight,
Um,
yeah, slight
a
change of
bit of a cheesy way
perspective.
of putting it. So,
Yeah.
exactly. Everything's exactly the same. I'm just in a slightly different position. And
Mm.
if I'm being brutally honest, she, her pronouns don't always feel entirely right. They don't feel entirely true, but they feel closer than he, him, and they feel closer than they, them. And I don't want to cry when they're applied to me. So there's that as well. I think I'd be lying if I felt entirely permanent about anything in my life. And
Mm.
if if mysterious extra sets of pronouns cropped up in the future that I'd feel more comfortable in, then I have to be open to that as a possibility. It was not socially acceptable to be queer 20 years ago. Even when I was a teenager, it's so different. The conversation's so different
Mm.
that a different name for me, a different description could feel appropriate in a year. I mean, I haven't been Annie for a year. I only decided to start calling myself Annie last March. So
Ah,
I feel like everything in my life is so much in flux and so kind of fast moving that I could be
yeah.
something completely different in a year, in 2 years. I think that's very, very exciting and very, very daunting, but very, very exciting.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned your mum. I mean, how have your parents been supportive? I don't know if you have any siblings or anything like that. How's your family been responding to your gender journey?
I have two siblings, and we're still in a kind of transitional phase there. I think it might have even been John Waters who said your family gets a grace period of 12 to 14 months before you get to get impatient with them. And there's difficulties.
Mm,
I don't like big announcements. That's something I struggled with at work in terms of correcting people. I'm happy
mm,
to correct somebody if I can phrase it without it being aggressive.
mm.
My brother's been amazing with pronouns and with referring to me as auntie, to the point where my 3-year-old niece, bless her, calls me auntie, uh,
Oh,
and started calling various uncles auntie as well. But she'll figure that out later on.
oh, that's so funny.
But she's got it sorted. My sister-in-law has it completely sorted. My parents are coming around to the idea. I think what's weird for me, and it's probably weird for you as well, is they don't know any other trans people,
Mm,
because there are so many queer and trans people in my circles. I live in a house of 6, and 2 of us are trans. So many people that I meet are trans. It feels weird to me that you'd only know one person, and that person would be your child. And occasionally, a celebrity will come forward as trans. My family's all big fans of Kay Tempest, and they were she, her pronouns, and Kate when we all started following them. So there's been an adjustment there as well.
yeah.
But we are moving closer to that as there are kind of people in their periphery that are more and more trans. I think it becomes easier to talk about and easier to discuss. My mum is Christian, and she started. I think she's finished the course on trans identities in the Bible now, which she said was fascinating, and she came back kind of really, really excited and curious about it. Yeah, no, there's genuine curiosity. My sister's birthday present to me was addressed to Annie, and that's the first time she's referred to me as Annie, and that's really exciting as well. And it's like these tiny steps that I can see each of my family members making fill me with a lot of joy and a lot of optimism.
Oh, that must be really heartwarming. Yeah.
We're not there yet. We're not really anywhere near there yet, but
Baby steps, right? Yeah.
baby steps, and it always is going to be. And I try and be as compassionate about that as I can. What I find really alarming, though, and I hope this is okay for me to talk about, but my best friend, his brother's trans, and their parents gender me perfectly every time, but refuse to respect pronouns or new name or anything. And there are all of these photos up, and they're kind of so kind of insistent and rigid about it. And it very much is a one rule for me and one rule for this other person's parents. Which I find really confusing. I mean, it kind of makes perfect sense, but also that I can waltz in as a complete stranger to them and be gendered correctly, and their son can't, feels so kind of obnoxious to me. Not obnoxious. I mean, I feel embarrassed by it. I feel obnoxious.
Mm,
And
yeah.
that's something that I find really, really strange. I don't think I'll ever get quite through or past that as a feeling.
Yeah, that sounds baffling, actually. Wow. Yeah, I've had a few conversations with parents so far, like a couple on the podcast. Well, three if you include the gender creative parent, Kyle. But yeah, it's a real journey for parents, and they do feel like a definite sense of loss there. So maybe they're just like in denial; they just can't go there yet. I don't know.
Mm,
Not that that makes it right by any,
no,
you know, stretch of the
but
imagination, but
we have to be empathetic towards people who don't really have a language for it at all. especially if you don't know anybody else, then suddenly being able to process this person that you've known their entire life, like suddenly being able to process a new way of thinking about or talking to them. I think
Mm.
I'd hope that we could be empathetic to that. Even patience is kind of harder than empathy, I think. But yeah, it's definitely something to wrestle with.
For sure. Well, it sounds like you could have a good influence there. I mean, your presence as like a gender diverse person, I think the more exposure they have to it, the more accepting they hopefully will become towards that. So,
Mm. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I hope so.
Mm. So, is there anything else that you would like people to know?
I don't know. That's such an interesting question.
It's a bit random, I
Um,
suppose, a bit generic, so I could specify
I don't
what.
think it's generic. I think it's just it's so open. I think everything about me is kind of out in the open. I don't really have any secrets from anybody. uh, I just want to say I'm really, really proud of who I am, and it's maybe not something I could have even said as a man, but I feel like I can say it now, and it's not because being male is bad or wrong or faulty. It's because I found words that made it easier for me to feel comfortable in my own skin. And that's the most exciting thing that I could do for me and that anybody could do for themselves. And I don't think that's advice or anything. I just think it's nice to be proud.
Yeah, I love that. Oh.
Thank you.
That's delightful to hear. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I don't know. I don't know. Thank you very much. It's been a really lovely chat.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing your story with me and with all the
Of
listeners,
course. It's been
I
an utter
suppose.
joy.
You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Angus, where you can also read the transcript, and you can find Angus on Spotify and Instagram at Papillon du Matin. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com and on social media. If you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Plans start from only $1 a month. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender for more details. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open minded.
Like, so most of my conversations about gender are things that kind of come up in little bits and pieces or in conversations here and there.
Mm.
So it's quite weird to have such a frank conversation about my kind of own personal history.
Mm.
They're very, very touching and very, very refreshing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I really loved your openness about, well, everything, really. I thought that was beautiful.
It's very, very exciting to be able to talk about myself for so long. You know, you're feeding my ego.
I'm quite happy to.